Thank you, Deputy President. I wasn't going to rise to speak on this matter, but those who might be listening need to have Senator Ludlam's comments put into perspective. If I can draw attention firstly to the legal challenges of those opposed to the Roe 8 project. The first was a challenge to the Supreme Court in Western Australia, not so much to the project but to the manner of environmental approval by the Environmental Protection Authority, and the Chief Justice, Wayne Martin, upheld the request of the applicants, and on appeal unanimously, Chief Justice Martin's colleagues in the Supreme Court of Western Australia overturned that decision, and in fact the project was approved to proceed. Senator Ludlam didn't make that point in his contribution. I then turn to the matter of the federal court, in which a challenge took place to the approval by the federal Environment Minister, and in January of this year, Deputy President, that was also overturned and the decision of the federal minister was upheld. But it's important that there be some historic perspective of this, because Roe 8 was part of the Stevenson plan from the 1950s, a plan which had gone internationally to tender, and Stevenson and his associates, a Scotsman, had won the tender to develop an overall transport plan for metropolitan Perth. And so successful was it, Stevenson moved his family from Scotland to Perth, and he oversaw that project. And much of what we see today in place, the freeway system, the highway networks, etc., were all there as part of Stevenson. In her wisdom, the then State Minister for Transport, Alana McTiernan, having once been in the State Parliament, briefly in this one, and now back being recycled again in the state election for another crack at the State Parliament, working in conjunction with the then Labor member for Fremantle, Mr McGuinty, decided that they would stop the conclusion of the Stevenson plan into Fremantle Port. And so in so doing they had the land rezoned, and they had that component of it zoned residential. And I've got to say to you that the then, I think, Secretary of the Transport Workers' Union in WA at that time resoundingly criticised Ms McTiernan and Mr McGuinty for the foolhardiness and stupidity of the decision they took. Now, that secretary was a person for whom I have enormous regard. He is now in the Senate. It is, of course, Senator Glenn Sterle. And he was quite right when he criticised Ms McTiernan and Mr McGuinty for their failure to give effect to the conclusion of a program that was some 40 years in the making. Now, the reason why the progress is now occurring with Roe 8 and Roe 9 is so there can be reasonable movement of heavy transport to and from the port of Fremantle, and indeed into the future, if and when, as you know, Deputy President, because you are Western Australian, there may well be an outer harbour constructed down in the Kwinana area to assist in future freight demands. Roe 8 will always be needed to be built. And indeed, the actions of then Transport Minister McTiernan are even worse, because those of us familiar with what is known as the Roe Highway know that we come to the Kwinana Freeway, very close to my parliamentary office, and it is a project which was referred to as Roe 7. It was always intended, of course, the roadworks should be put into place so that Roe 8 would continue in a east-west direction across the north-southerly Kwinana Freeway. Minister McTiernan, in her actions, ensured that there would be no future provision made for a Row 8, and today the taxpayer is added to the burden of several tens of millions of dollars as a result of the refusal of Minister McTiernan at that time to actually allow for the future provision of Row 8. Senator Ludlam is correct in the sense that there is a small area of Row 8. I've walked it. All of Row 8 I have walked. It adjoins a road which already exists. It goes over a limited area of wetland, it is true. But what hasn't been said here this afternoon, Deputy President, is that several $1 million are being expended to ensure that the nature of the building of bridges over that area are such that they will have the least adverse environmental impact. There will be movement capacity for people who do use the area. And I want to remind those who might be interested, I had the opportunity on several occasions to journey over a similar wetland in Louisiana, America, between the cities of Lafayette and Baton Rouge. That particular road is two bridges, acting a Deputy President, one in each direction, each dual carriageway, and they are 40 kilometres long, 23 miles. And I've made it my business in investigating Row 8 and 9 to receive information from the Louisiana Department of the Environment and others as to the apparent adverse impact of that 40-kilometre by 2 highway over the affected wetland area. And the advice to me has been it has actually improved the aquatic environment of that space during that time. Now, I have an enormous amount of respect for Senator Ludlam, but I do have to take issue with him when we have seen the actions of people who have every right to protest. In a democracy, we've all got the right to protest, but there is a rule of law, and the rule of law says you take your case to the courts, and you must respect the decision of the courts. And we know, of course, today the interruptions that have taken place by people who have flatly refused to accept the democratic process in the state of Western Australia, chained themselves to machinery, abused those who have been responsible to see the project commence, climbed themselves into trees, naked for whatever reason, with every hope and intent to stop that work. And the cost in salary and overtime to the Western Australian Police Service when they should have been out attending to other work has been monstrous. Deputy President, there is nothing new, and I will conclude with this comment. It was put to me recently, this is some recent initiative of the Western Australian government. Well, I have in my possession, not in front of me, a newspaper from September of 2008, when I was standing in the state election in Western Australia for the seat of Alfred Cove, evidenced by the fact that my advertisement and face appear on that front page, and the headline in that local newspaper in 2008 was "Libs to proceed with Roe project." So let there be no doubt in the minds of those who are questioning the democratic opportunity here that back in 2008, not the last state election, the state election before that, our party had said we were going to proceed with Row 8. That is the democratic process. People elected the Barnett government in 2008 in the full knowledge that that project would go ahead. They re-elected the Barnett government in 2013, knowing the project would go ahead. And it is interesting, of course, that we find ourselves here today in that circumstance of this disputation, which is now claimed to somehow or other have recently arisen. The funding is in place. It is the continuation of a 40-year project. I will be the first to say that I think the government in Western Australia and its department could well have sold the issue better. But let me say this as I wind up my contribution. The City of Cockburn, the members of which I have tremendous relationship, commissioned a study of inquiry into what would happen if Row 8 wasn't built. Well, of course, it is dominated by people who are opposed to the project, and they attempted to bury it, to explain what the enormity of the traffic congestion will be and the risks if Row 8 is not built. Fortunately, one councillor, and I don't need to go into the politics of the Council of Cockburn, but one councillor ensured that that report was made public. And indeed, Madam Deputy President, what did it reveal? It revealed the importance of proceeding with what Stevenson came up with in the 50s. There is a group of councils called the South West Group. It is Fremantle, East Fremantle, Melville, Cockburn, Kwinana and Rockingham. And that South West Group independently had assessed the impact on road safety, on rail safety, indeed on transport activities. And once again, those members of that group of councils who didn't want the results made public did their best to make sure that report was buried. And of course, indeed, that report has surfaced and it emphasises the enormous risk that will happen to that area of the southern suburbs of Perth if Row 8 isn't built. Deputy President, it wasn't my intention to speak today on this matter, but I do want to correct the record. I want people to know that this is and has been a democratic process. The courts at state and federal level have been involved. The people have known for years what is going to happen, and I just simply say it does not do any good at all for there to be small amounts of information presented in this place giving the suggestion that it will not be challenged.